Nick, I cannot wait to hear about your Christmas. Of course, our listeners might be tuning in at a variety of different times throughout the year. But for us, on day of recording here, we're just kind of coming off the big holiday. So I'm curious to know how Christmas went at the Indeglio household.
We had a great couple days leading up to Christmas and a very nice Christmas. So the day before Christmas Eve, school was canceled due to the timing of the weather conditions, which was definitely the safer call overall. That night, we took Bella and Talia to see my brother Mike's show, which you saw the week before.
Oh, yeah.
So they got a
Fantastic.
chance to see the show, which was really
Hmm.
nice. We do Christmas Eve at my sister's house, so that was a very relaxing, great meal by Tina. Very enjoyable time there. And then on Christmas Day, Danielle's family came up for dinner. Mike's wife, is in New York, so Mike came over to see my mom, and everybody hung out together. And it was just definitely. I think low key is not the right word because we were busy, but there wasn't like a whole bunch of travel involved, and everything we did was enjoyable. So
Yeah,
kids had a nice time. Everyone enjoyed each other's company, which I think is in the end a pretty that's a win for Christmas, a definite positive.
absolutely.
Um, and I think that my biggest takeaway from minus the actual the holiday connotations was we just so happened to as we usually do we watch the Christmas toy which we've discussed on the show before on
Uh-huh.
Christmas Eve,
Yeah.
and YouTube pulled a very Muppet Christmas Next, which we had talked about. Did I get
Hmm.
the title right? Is it that's
Uh,
or was it Muppet Family Christmas? Which
yeah, it's a
the
Muppet Family Christmas. I
Muppet
think that's the
Family
one you're
Christmas.
referring to. Yeah.
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 And if you don't watch that every year, because it's like anything Jim Henson style. There's a million gags and jokes and tender moments in every scene.
Yeah.
So I had just forgotten so many of them, and we were just laughing watching the hilarity. In particular, totally forgot that the Swedish chef tries to cook Big Bird throughout that entire holiday special, which just cracked me up.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
just can't go wrong. So that was our Christmas. How about the at the Albright household?
Oh, fantastic. Man, we have so many, we've talked in the show before about the value in family traditions, right? And we just have so many that are all kind of wrapped up in the holiday season. And so it was just a really enjoyable Christmas to do those traditions. And this year, Nick, we started a new one. And this one really is courtesy of and thanks to the Indeglio family,
Oh,
because uh, believe it or not, for the first time, you brought something for us this summer was a all out Nerf war. Right when you came, we had that really fun all out Nerf war. So we typically let the kids open one present, an ornament. We get them an ornament, and then one present on
uh-huh.
Christmas Eve, which is usually like pajamas. That's what we've done in the past. But this year it was different. This year it was everybody got a Nerf gun, a new Nerf gun, and so it was like we all opened at the same time, and then it was a mad rush to get it unwrapped and loaded. And meanwhile, Christy cheated because she didn't even wrap her; she had it loaded, and she was just kind of pegging us all while we were trying to unwrap. But man, it was just so much fun. We had a blast doing that, and again, the rest of the traditions as well. But the Nerf battle is going to be a Christmas Eve family tradition because that was just so much fun.
So, in short, Rick, you're saying that the Indeglio family brought the gift of violence to the Albright family.
It brought the gift of joy and competition, at least. That maybe that's a better way to put it. But man, it was a blast for sure, for sure.
It's well, I'm glad there was a small contribution on our part there. Just it's such a nice time of year, and like you were saying, the kids have off. It's you can actually do things like that and really enjoy it.
For
We
sure.
during our Nerf war last night, Rita walked around slowly trying to pick up the bullets as we were firing them. And
Okay.
Danielle's mom she is I mean you saw what the house looks like decorated. So she
Yeah.
is very orderly in that sense. So she was not having the Nerf war at all. She was
Oh.
definitely
Okay.
yes, it was a and she got quite a bit of Nerf darts aimed at her as well. So
Nick, is that a family tradition for you guys? You have a Nerf war every year?
It's not usually on Christmas Day.
Oh,
It's
okay.
normally during Christmas break at some point.
Ah.
But there were quite a few Nerf guns given this
Uh-huh.
Christmas. And for the same reason, as you mentioned, we had so much fun during the Nerf War of June 2022 in Tennessee. We needed to upgrade some of our Nerf. Uh, I don't want to say
Your
weapons. Our
arsenal?
Nerf, our arsenal. Yes,
Yeah.
our artillery and arsenal, which we
Yeah.
did. Danielle made a pretty big boo boo, which she didn't realize on my birthday, which was just a couple days before Christmas. She gave me my Nerf gun, which that part was fine. However, she wrapped the wrong bullets with it. So
Oh.
instead of wrapping the mega bullets, she wrapped the mega XL bullets. And the girls were wondering why we had mega XL bullets and a gun that didn't have mega XL capabilities. So they kind of figured out that there was a mega XL gun coming on
Ah.
Christmas Day.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but hey, small potatoes in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. So much fun. So much fun. Hey Nick, let's move on to the blog because I can't wait to hear. You're up this week. So take it away, man.
Yes. All right. Well, this is a pretty short blog overall. But we'll see what you think. I'm curious to see your reaction to it. It's called The Blue Suit: Outside the Box Thinking. One of the leadership skills which develops the most over time is precognition. This is an almost intuitive sense which begins to tackle a challenge subconsciously. You may have seen professional development sessions offering role-playing or simulations. Those types of PD are meant to enhance precog abilities, but they fall short because they lack real-world stakes. It takes years of meaningful experiences to develop this sense, although the skill builds faster for very open-minded and creative thinkers. The ultimate attainment of precognition is the ability to put yourself in the shoes of the person or group that is presenting the problem, which requires looking at the issue through their lens. Here's a quick assessment for you of your precog abilities. Read the following anecdote, or listen to it. When finished, do a quick analysis of how you processed the story in your own mind. How outside the box was your thinking? And here's the quick story. An old lady was very upset, as her husband Albert had just passed away. She went to the undertaker's to have one last look at her dearly departed husband. The instant she saw him, she started crying. The mortician walked over to comfort her. Through her tears, she explained that she was upset because her dearest Albert was wearing a black suit, and it was his fervent wish to be buried in a blue suit. The mortician apologized and explained that traditionally they always put bodies in a black suit, but he'd see what he could arrange. The distraught wife said thank you and mentioned again that it was Albert's favorite color, blue, and he looked the best in a blue suit. The next day, she returned to the funeral parlor to have one last moment with Albert before the funeral the following day. When the mortician pulled back the curtain, she managed to smile through her tears as Albert was resplendent in a smart blue suit. She said to the mortician, "Wonderful, wonderful. How did you make that beautiful blue suit on such short notice?" And the mortician responded saying, "Well, yesterday afternoon after you left, a man about your husband's size and weight was brought in, and, shockingly, he was wearing a blue suit. His wife was quite upset because she wanted him buried in a black suit." Albert's wife smiled at the undertaker. After that, the undertaker continued, "I just switched the heads." And there it is.
Okay.
Now, of course, that anecdote is oftentimes used as a comedy bit or a joke. However, I would assume, Rick, that as you were listening to it, if you haven't heard that one before, you were
Have not.
expecting the punchline probably to be that the Undertaker switched the suits, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Simple solution. So your punchline basically falls under a completely outside the box solution. Probably not, of course, the most common sense one that the mortician came up with, which was something you would not have expected. Switching a body part as opposed to switching the suits there.
Yeah.
So, and an exercise in thinking a little bit differently, sometimes thinking outside the box and considering your audience when you look at problems as problems develop over time.
Huh. Very interesting. A little disturbing too, but really interesting. Yeah. Uh, yeah, and so it's how kind of, I think what you're getting at is how you're kind of processing solutions, right? And
Yes.
I'm trying to connect that back to where we started with kind of this idea of precognition and yeah, the capacity for kind of outside the box thinking as part of that precognition. Is that I'm following? Yeah, yeah,
Oh yeah, absolutely. And
yeah,
I think the now had that story been set up for you saying, Rick, this is a joke, your brain would have processed that story as it went a little bit differently, most likely,
yeah.
right?
Hmm.
It would have been
Sure.
looking for a punchline. It would have been looking for where can the comedy play into this? Because
Hmm.
if you knew it was a joke, you're looking at a scenario that is oftentimes considered, very somber and very sad, and you knew somewhere along the line the story was going to change, right? So the setup or your audience, perhaps the teller, the narrator, whether reliable or unreliable, matters in the story. And a lot of times over time, experience dictates that we're going to try the thing that always worked for us
Yeah.
in the past. And
Hmm.
there might be other ways to tackle a problem, other ways to look at things through a fresh lens, or a different way to get to an outcome or a solution that isn't always the way you might normally attack it or get to something there. So just something to shock the system a little bit and move people outside the comfort zone there.
Yeah, I really like that, Nick. And I think, I'm coming from a counseling perspective, and I think counselors kind of are at risk of the same kind of challenges, right? Is they have a standard approach to kind of working with kids and working with parents, and they don't really deviate from that. And we talk a lot about this in our profession, that, well, there's value in that, right? Because you get to know that approach really well. It's like, this is my theory, this is my approach, I stick with it, I know it, I'm an expert on it, and there's value in that. But the negative is it really inhibits creativity and open-minded thinking, and all the different kind of solutions that are potentially possible by using different approaches and different theories. And man, I love that story. I was unsure how to respond to it at the end. I thought, am I laughing because it was a joke, or because, yeah? But I really like that. I'm going to use this to challenge my students a little bit, and maybe to kind of engage in this conversation about the value of one standard approach versus the value in taking what the kid, the student, the client gives you, and adjusting and work, kind of being in the moment with them. Yeah, I'm
And I
definitely going to
think
use that. I like that. Mm.
one of the things you just said there that strikes me is that, and you use the example of a counselor or a therapist, right? Working with a client, and if a particular issue that you've worked with 100 times, if you've always worked that issue using the same solution because your clients have been in the same demographic, the same socioeconomic status, that might work. But if you have a client who comes from a completely different background, that approach that's worked 100 times before might not be the best approach because that client, that audience looks different, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So, the intuitive sense that develops over time in leadership, which is 99% of the time, I think that it's super valuable. It goes that extra step when not only are you thinking outside the box, but you're thinking outside the box empathetically using someone else's perspective. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
that's a twofer that is really hard to do. And again, it's hard to practice. Like you can do simulations out the wazoo, but
yeah.
until you're in a place where the stakes matter, some of that fight, flight, or freeze comes into play. It doesn't always necessarily carry over or apply.
Yeah, Nick, we talked a few weeks ago, I think, about at least we mentioned the concept of flow, and I think I might have mentioned it even in my blog. This concept from Mahai Csikszentmihalyi, who talks about this flow experience where the challenge is really, really significant, but your skill level kind of matches that, and you're very much in the moment. I mean, and you're kind of just, it's this really natural high that people get when they kind of reach that flow state, right?
Yep.
And we lose track of time, and our artists get this, right? They kind of get in their mode, and musicians get this, athletes for sure get this when they're doing their sport at a very high level with a high level of challenge. Even gamers, right, can hit a sense of flow, and lose track of hours, right? Because
Yeah.
they're high challenged but highly skilled. And I wrote an article. It's been quite a few years ago now, but in the article, I talked about counselors and therapists experiencing flow because they allow themselves to be in the moment, to allow to
Mm-hmm.
just take what the client or the student gives you and go from that, and not kind of come in with this preconceived notion of what you're going to do and what you're going to say and how it's going to go, which you can, and I think you can be effective that way. But I think probably my best counseling is when I lose track of time. Like, oh my goodness, we're done. That was already half an hour. I had no idea. This was already 50 minutes and we're done. But we're just kind of going where the session leads us, right? And what folks want to talk about and solutions they want to talk about, and or that present themselves in the moment. So, man, I just really like that. Really like that story, Nick. Thank you for bringing that for us. Hmm.
And once again, a lot to ponder with that concept of flow, and a lot of different questions that brings up over, on different topics that at some point would be fun to investigate.
Yeah.
Musicians is always one that fascinated me. If you look, when you usually look at the lifespan of an artist's career, you notice that they usually start tailing off their creative output in their late 40s.
Hmm.
And as that partly because their circumstances of life have changed so much, maybe their level of comfort, if they've reached a certain financial status, that the brain just become crusty and, couldn't be as creative as it used to be. The life experiences don't translate at that age to what's popular. Just, what I mean? A lot to consider over time as well with those things, which, it's getting too far off the beaten track. But, at some point coming back to that might be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Fascinating. Well, let's do come back to that, Nick, but I want to go ahead and for us to kind of move forward today because we've got another study to look at. So we kind of made this adjustment here a few weeks ago. We'd been talking for months even, about the 40 developmental assets, and we've just about gotten halfway through when we came across this great article that has from Edutopia. It's the 10 most significant research studies of 2022 for the field of education. And we thought, what, this is a good time for us to kind of pause on the assets. We'll come back to them later, but let's pause and let's tackle these because we're at the end here of 2022. And it'd be great to look and see professionally what our researchers have been researching and what they've been investigating and what they've been concluding. And there's some great stuff in here. And we looked at one of those last week, and excited to look at this one this week. And so this one, Nick, I think is right up your alley. It's from an article called "The Relationship Between Special Education Placement and High School Outcomes." And let me just go ahead and read this kind of little intro here from the article, and then I'd just love to kind of hear your thoughts on this. When the Individual Disabilities Education Act called for greater inclusion, mandating that students with disabilities receive support in the least restrictive environment, one goal was to ensure that educational accommodations didn't interfere with the students' social and emotional development in classrooms full of their peers. Thus far, though, rigorous evidence of the academic benefits has been thin. Now, a new large-scale study, that's this one we're going to talk about, appears to put the matter beyond dispute. When researchers tracked nearly 24,000 adolescents who qualified for special education, they discovered that spending a majority of the day, at least 80%, in general education classes improved reading scores by a whopping 24 points and math scores by 18 points, compared with scores of their more isolated peers with similar disabilities. That is a profound conclusion, Nick, and I'm interested to kind of hear your thoughts because I know this is kind of right in your wheelhouse of expertise.
Oh man, this is a meaty topic, and there's big chunks that you have to take bite size in order to kind of get through all of this, right? So, looking at a study, first of all, with 24,000 participants, that's a big N, and that's a good thing. So we know that that's the kind of number that when you start drawing conclusions from research, someone tells me the sample size was 24,000, my ears are going to perk up a little bit,
Yeah.
right? I'm going to
Yeah.
listen a little bit harder. Now, we weren't there. We didn't conduct these studies. However, for published articles and especially, looking through the Edutopia lens, we know that they usually put out information that is good information
Mm-hmm.
from the social sciences. And we got to assume that the research is valid, right? The way they conducted the studies, the way they drew their conclusions. We're going to work under the assumption that all of that is relatively accurate. So that gives us further research to support that um, comparing like populations, right? Ideally, you want to be in the more general education setting with peers, typical peers. Here's the challenge. Most people might say, well, doesn't that just kind of make sense? Like, doesn't, right? Wouldn't we just assume that you're going to succeed more if you're receiving the same instruction that everyone else receives? It goes back to the old episode from The Simpsons. In fact, it's my favorite Simpsons episode of all time, where the Simpsons move to work, where Homer works in a new power plant or a new facility, with the real rich and famous guy who becomes his best friend. And Bart's going to a new school, and they immediately recognize that his skills are way lower than everybody else's, and they put him in the special class, right? And Bart looks
Bart.
around.
They put Bart in the special class.
I'm sorry. Yeah. What did I say?
Yeah, no. I just want to. I'm gonna make sure I followed it because I don't recall this episode. No. Okay.
Yeah. I'll have to send you the link to it. So yeah, Bart's in the special class, right? I think he's eternally in fourth grade, so he's always a fourth grade, 10 years old or so. And he looks around as the teacher is passing out circles of paper because that's safer than having straight edges on paper. And Bart says, "How are we going to catch up to everyone else if we're going slower than they are?" So Bart, all these years ago, this is an episode from the early 2000s, I believe. It could have been late 90s, where basically the biggest issue regarding special education services is brought up, which is if you are already behind, in order to make the progress enough to catch up to your typical peers, you have to change how you deliver the instruction, the amount of instruction, the quality of instruction. There's so many factors at play. So in situations where you can provide an inclusive environment, whether that's co-taught, push-in, ways to make sure that you're actually, included, that is what is preferable. And we've done that, I would say, that has been over the overarching goal of most places that have a reasonably sound educational facility over the past, I would say, 30 to 35 years at this point. The problem is that we don't always do that correctly. When you say we're going to do co-taught, and for those listening who aren't, in education, co-taught is when you have students who are considered regular education and other students, less than 50% in any given environment, with a learning disability of some sort, in the same class together. And you would have two teachers who are planning together, synergistically teaching together, really making magic happen, in an environment there. That doesn't happen all the time. Regular ed teachers sometimes can be, possessive of their environment. They don't like to share. Special ed teachers aren't always comfortable sharing the teaching load. In a lot of places, class sizes are large. It's hard to create a truly heterogeneous group that's not too heterogeneous. A lot of times I like to say sometimes the best inclusive environments are ones that are heterogeneously grouped, which sounds like a double negative, but it actually can kind of make sense in practice there. So I think all of those things sound good, but it's whether or not we're putting the money, the resources, and really believing in that philosophy and doing that, because it is simply easier to have direct instruction classes where you separate those kids out. It's simply easier as you move into the secondary level to just have leveling. The bluebirds, the hens and the chicken littles, and reading groups and whatnot. Separate the low, the medium, the high math kids. It's just easier that way. And unfortunately, when you start seeing that progress in place, eventually you start seeing alternative placements outside of the regular school, and then graduation rates start being impacted. Attendance rates impacted even more so than they usually are. And you start seeing negative outcomes there. So I can really see this from both sides of the coin. It then just becomes what is best for the individual student, because what is that school environment delivering? And again, like I said, I can go in so many different directions, on this particular topic because it is so incredibly relevant. Let me pause there for a moment and collect your thinking here as to what the study's saying and where we're headed.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me, Nick, because it's outside of my areas of expertise and experience. So it was interesting as I kind of read through the study, and the research is from the Journal of Special Education. It's a peer-reviewed
Yep.
research article, so it's this is good stuff for sure. As as you already kind of pointed out for folks, I guess it was convincing to me, right, that from the perspective of the students in special education, that they were being better served academically in the regular education classroom. That seems very clear to me and makes sense to me. I guess my brain was going towards, okay, so if this is true, this is what we need to do. But then what's the effect on the other students? I guess that was my question, and I don't know that. And I have some guesses, but I'm not sure. And so I'm interested to kind of hear your thoughts. But let me kind of say my guesses.
Yep.
My guesses are that the teacher is going to be much more challenged because you've got the zone of proximal developments, right? This is old Vygotsky theory, right? Are all over
Yep.
the place. Really, really all over the map. And so that it just creates really a difficult situation for teachers. Co-teaching, you mentioned, as being one kind of solution. I thought of another one. I know in theory this works, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on having higher achieving students mentor the students and helping them get caught up. In theory, that sounds great. I'm not sure in practice how effective that is. I don't know. I think it's so much strain on the teachers. I wonder about that.
Well, yeah. So, Rick, you are wondering about the right things,
Okay.
clearly, and I want to go back to the statement I made a few minutes ago and tie it directly into what you're asking there, and it ties into the students who are grasping that concept, helping teach, and helping that's what students with learning disabilities, et cetera, understand those concepts, right?
Yeah.
And that's where the concept of heterogeneous grouping, right? Groups of different ability levels put together. What I like to say, though, is that the next step of that is homogeneously grouping heterogeneous groups. So if you have 100 students, right, and you're using a traditional bell curve, you don't want to put the students that are in the lowest 10% of that bell curve in the same class as the students in the top 10% of that bell curve. That's too big of a gap to
Yeah.
have long-term meaningful teaching take place in a full-sized classroom with a teacher who is genuinely trying to really teach every student in that class. It's so easy for us to say, oh, a good teacher can do it. A good teacher can differentiate. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, everything was about differentiated instruction.
Yeah.
Well, that's all nice to say, but it's very hard in practice to do because you're going way too fast a lot of times, and way too deep for the students who are performing at a level much lower than conceptually where you're trying to teach. And then you're also slowing down part of the group at the top level of that curve, who oftentimes, when you're looking at the lowest 10% and the highest 10%, there's going to be a high level of frustration for those kids at the higher level trying to do something that kids shouldn't always just be expected to do, which is helping teach. Teaching is an art, right? We get to
Yeah.
advanced degrees to do this if you're doing it right and doing it properly. So the whole point when I say homogeneously heterogeneous grouped is really trying to segment the way you're heterogeneously grouping. So you have kids somewhat in a zone of similar abilities where they can work in groups, where the pacing and the tempo can be properly matched, and where there's no ultimate frustration really, really hitting all the time for any one particular student group or the instructor in particular. I reference co-teaching because that's a model most frequently used to say, oh yeah, we're doing, this isn't a special education class. However, that's not the only model. There are other ways to do that. And there are situations where it's sometimes from a disability standpoint, it's better to be in a separate environment. Let's look at the other side of the coin for a minute there. There are certain disabilities which lend itself to quicker progress in an environment that is not inside the regular education setting. The main idea, though, is there that it doesn't turn into an incarceration system where you
Yeah.
never have a chance of returning to the mainstream there. So if it's done thoughtfully and if it's done with outcomes in mind, then a direct instruction environment and alternative placement environment can be successful. It goes back overall. And I like one of the questions I always ask when we do interviews for special education teachers. My first question or last question, depending on how the interview is going, will be, what is the overall purpose of special education? And 9 times out of 10, the answer I will get will be, it's to provide the resources that a student needs to mitigate their learning disability. That's a great answer, right? It's not the best answer. The best answer is, the main goal of special education is for the student to not be in special education, to phase them out, right? To make sure so they don't need it anymore, to catch them up, for lack of a better term. And I hate that term, but it's the easiest to use here. And that's the truth. And a lot of times, if we label a kid back in first grade, if we don't have a plan for long term about how we're going to get that kid up to reading level so they no longer have to be stuck with a learning disability in the area of reading, stuck, it is what it is. If we don't have a long-term plan, then that kid's going to graduate eventually or not graduate with that learning disability and never having really gotten to the point we needed to get them to. So a lot of that falls on us and the school system. I think a lot of the bad name of special education at this point in time comes from the fear of litigation and places I think that we've moved past in a large degree between probably the late 90s and like 2010 to 2013-ish, where I think there was way too much litigation and way too much falling on the school's shoulders and heads at that point. Again, I'm rambling there. I think there is a couple statistics I want to bring up in a moment, but once again, I want to slow myself down and catch your thoughts on just that line of thinking in general.
Nick, as you were talking that through, my brain went to RTI, response to intervention.
Yep.
Is that what? Yeah, okay, that's what it was sounding like. What you were describing.
Now called Rick. Now we've changed the name.
Okay.
So you can't call it RTI or RTII anymore. Now it's called MTSS. So we went from response to intervention and instruction to multi-tiered systems of support. Again, it's all the same thing, just different name, different bow. And the idea is, hey, we're going to provide as much support as we can before we actually identify a kid, which is what we should be doing. The national averages right now around the country, mostly public school, looking statistically, it's around 15% of students that are diagnosed with a learning disability, right? And the learning disabilities usually fall in 13 different categories, of which we're not going to review at this point. However, when you look at that breakdown demographically, it's all pretty even right now. So the current statistics is from 2020 and 2021, about 14.9% white students, 16.8% Black students, 14% Hispanic students, right in that realm, right? Now, the question is, are we over-identifying or are we under-identifying certain populations? There has been a push, over the past 10 years or so, to not jump to identification for some of our subgroups, for some of our, whether it's our socioeconomically disadvantaged groups, whether it's Hispanic students, Black students, Asian students, any of those categories, by not jumping to special ed diagnosis or identification right away. Then we run into the possible problem of, oh no, if we under-identify and we aren't providing solid MTSS services, then we are doing just as big of a disservice as if we are over-identifying.
Yeah.
And then, and that, again, that starts leading into all kinds of different types of philosophical issues for schools who are using RTII-based MTSS type interventions. Because when you've exhausted those interventions and you've done everything that the school can do within its power, and you're standing at the precipice of designation in terms of, a special ed identification, if your school statistics are too high over identifying in a certain category, you can be audited. You can actually get in trouble for those types of things. These are heavy considerations that school districts have to take under consideration, which are, it's not easy stuff overall, and there's no easy answers to any of it. I'll give you one quick example from 2005. So we're going to go back about 20 years almost at this point. I was working for a specific school district, And we got our state audit, our state review, which is of all special education services that occur, and we were audited and identified in one area. Okay, and at the time, they had just changed the designations from if and Rick, you might remember, we're going way back now. This is like ed classes, education classes in the late '90s. The designation TMR, which at the time was trainably mentally retarded. Now that was back when those terms were actually classified terms and used in the books and whatnot. So an IQ below the level of 70. However, functional life skills, meaning that those students could work in an environment, if they were trained properly. Obviously, we don't use terms like that anymore, but that was the designation. And we were under-identified in that range with the Asian student population. So we had to come up with a remediation plan for how our district was going to make sure we identified more Asian students with an IQ lower than 70. This is true. This is a completely true story. And we had to create an improvement plan to make sure that we would meet the state and national averages to do a better job. That improvement plan essentially became advertising, making sure we were advertising that the district had all of these special education services. And if you feel like your child might need some of these services, if you're especially for the pre-kindergarten students, ages 3 to 5, that those students, the parents should reach out to the district. Interestingly, this plan was finalized right around August 1st, before the new school year was starting. We had a family move in on August 15th that just so happened met the criteria for both of those things. And by having one student in the district who met that criteria, just because they happened to move in on August 15th, we met the criteria of that plan and then came off of an improvement. My point of telling that story is you got to be careful when you're using these types of statistics, because sometimes you just kind of wind up in the realm of ridiculous. Then again, that was a very low end, correct? What we were just talking about, this, the study sample size of 24,000. In bigger districts, in large city districts, when you're looking at state populations, maybe there is a lot more meaning to some of the subgroup statistics. But a lot of times, I think we're data rich and information poor. We call that the drip philosophy. We've got all this information, and then we start making these categorizations that educationally have no meaning to them. So just something else to think about and consider.
Yeah. Wow. Nick, one other thing I wanted to hit on, again, is if coming from a school counseling perspective, my brain kind of always goes to social emotional learning. And as I kind of read through the lit review, I'm seeing in there stuff I didn't know, right? But that makes sense that students who have been identified for special education services are better served in the general education environment in regards to their social emotional health. And
yes,
and I'm just thinking, again, I'm hypothesizing here because I don't know the research, but I'm thinking the same might be true for the students in general education who have the students from special education in the same classroom with them. At least I think there's the potential for that, right? For that to be great kind of ability to empathize, ability to learn about others and other ability levels. I'm thinking there's just so much potential there. Do you see that in your experience, that potential is taken advantage of, or what are your thoughts? Or does it create more problems with bullying, or I don't know. What are your thoughts?
No, I think I am in, and I've said this on the podcast before, and I'll say it over and over again, because I think it's important that people who are fortunate enough to work in an environment like I do, in a place where there are enough resources, where there could be enough resources depending on the situation, where the community is supportive, where it's you have a large middle class to upper middle class population. It makes all of that work better and easier, just because we're able to purchase supplies and buy programs and go look at other schools who are doing good things, and most importantly, hire great teachers. When you're able to do that, the rest kind of takes care of itself. So I see that every day, Rick. I see the benefits of an inclusive environment because we can afford to do it, and for the most part, my district can afford to do it well. However, I also have seen, whether it's research, whether it's anecdotes from others, or going around, doing a variety of other things that we do, places where it doesn't work, and we just give it lip service and say we're doing those things, and then
Yeah.
it doesn't work. And just to think of a couple examples, like when you get to the middle school in particular, what's one of the biggest things middle schoolers live by, which is, man, I don't want to be seen and I don't want to be embarrassed, right?
Yeah.
So, I don't want to be in classes that look different from everyone else's
Hmm.
classes. And where oftentimes do those classes, because they're smaller, what kind of rooms are they in? Right? Smaller rooms. They're in like the closet rooms, or
Yeah.
people know, oh, so and so is going into that's the reading room, that's the special math room, or the whatever that is. Those are stigmas that's real, and if we ever get to the point where we're ignoring that, or we're poo-pooing that, which I realize is an old man term to use, I think that we're doing a disservice to kids overall, because it's not considering the SEL component, which is a big deal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
I would also say, Rick, and I don't know what you've seen, just hearing from students that are going into the field, that are going and doing practicums, and people who've communicated with you after they've started. But there's also, and I think this statement could be considered controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway. I think there lately has been more of a trend, might not be the right word, that might be too large, but given the return to school following the pandemic, I think there are students that are looking for an identity, and they're finding it sometimes in being identified in certain ways, whether it's waiting in the counseling waiting room, to see a counselor, because that identifies that they have stuff going on, and maybe that's a way to say that to other people without having to say it out loud, that
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
experiencing stuff, I'm going through
Sure.
stuff, trauma, whatever that might look like. um, and and again, I'm not saying that's good or bad.
Hmm.
I'm just saying that's what we are seeing more of,
Yeah.
just in the school environment there. So, is the stigma a little bit less, perhaps? Are there some kids who might welcome that smaller environment now, for different reasons? I think there is something to that, and I think it would be foolish to discount that because it might not be the most politically correct statement to make. I think we should be looking at it to a large degree. But when you look at the overall big picture, again, I'm going to go back to saying, I see those benefits. It's no different than when a school's trained in the ASCA model, right, the ASCA model for
Yeah.
counseling, that they say, okay, we're going to give you all these. This is what the model should look like in your school for the optimal success. But those come with conditions, right? There are also caseload suggestions, and there are other prerequisites that exist. Same is true for when we talk about being in the special ed environment less than 80%. If we're not hitting certain prerequisites, class size, the amount of instructional time, the quality of the instructional materials, and the quality of the teacher, then we are not necessarily hitting the markers we need to be hitting for success.
Yeah. Nick, gosh, you just have so, so much value in as you're sharing. And I don't, some of our listeners may not kind of have caught some of the early stuff to know, but just to kind of for them. So your background before being an administrator was special education for a number of years, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes, most of my teaching career was in middle school, grades 5 through 8, and ninth grade as well. Primarily emotional support, and back. I mean, I'm so old now that this is back when we were almost fully secluded. This was back self-contained, we
Yeah.
used to call it, which is easier in some ways, even though it's not always easy having 15 kids in a class all day long. But it's more manageable when you're just one person. But yeah, that was primarily my experience, and also with multiple disability classrooms, like physical support and things like
Yeah.
that. So yeah, that was always where my passion is, and still is to a large degree. It's one of my favorite. Those are my favorite classes to visit, and try to make progress. And unfortunately, over time, not much has changed in how we're promoting services, other than we are doing much better overall with pushing for more inclusion and providing more resources for our teachers and for our kids, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess I should also point out that your beautiful wife Danielle also has kind of a long kind of history working in special education as well. I don't recall how many years, but I think it was a lot.
Yeah, oh God, I think she's been regular ed for, I guess, 4 or 5 years now. So 12 or so
Yeah,
years, 12 to 15 years in special
yeah,
ed, and a
yeah.
big chunk
Wow,
of that was in a lower socioeconomic district.
wow.
So you're facing even more challenges in those situations there. And here's the thing, Rick, and this is the most unfortunate thing, is that the level of burnout for special education teachers is at an all-time high right now. The overwhelming amount of paperwork, the incredibly high expectations to be essentially a master writer, a master case manager, and be able to teach about 5 different direct instruction subjects, as well as co-teaching all at the same time in the course of a day. It's burning people out like crazy. So, and unfortunately, we're seeing less and less career special education teachers, and more special ed teachers who are looking for an out, whether it's into a regular ed environment or just leaving the profession altogether. Big picture, we've got to do something to help. And I don't know what the answer to that is. You know what I mean? Because it's funny,
Yeah,
we shut the world down, and all of a sudden it becomes okay to, you know, put requirements on hold and focus more on social emotional learning. But then, all of a sudden one day we say it's all magically fixed, and all those expectations are heaped upon teachers and kids again,
yeah.
which is a really difficult thing. So, but again, I don't want to dovetail too far off with that particular topic.
Well, no, but I think it is relevant, Nick. We talked even, I think last week we were talking about kind of teacher salaries and that being a significant issue, right? That we need to be looking at to make sure that we're continuing to have excellent quality teaching in the classroom. But I'm thinking as you kind of describe some of those challenges and burdens for folks in special education, it's not just about the money. It's about the work
No,
environment. It's about all the kind of demands and overwhelming nature of kind of what's been foisted upon them to do. So yeah, there's
yeah,
other kind of changes. It sounds like.
there is, Rick, and again, I'm slightly drifting here in regards to the statistics in this particular study, but as principals, but just from the leadership perspective, it's easy to say like, oh, you just have to show people you appreciate them, just let them know they're appreciated. I could I could bring 3-course meals every day to my special ed teachers, and
Yeah,
it wouldn't be enough because
yeah,
it's too much. It's the workload is just too much. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
the
yeah,
best way we can help teachers, and look, you got to do all the other things too. You feed them before they eat you, absolutely. But we've got to keep advocating at higher levels to make changes to the system, bigger picture, and that's just for teachers, you got to, obviously, for teachers, get involved with your association, get involved with, the national level associations, your state level associations, so that way your voice is heard, and do what you can. It's a lot right now.
yeah. Mm. Nick, I've so appreciated hearing your take on this. Really, really, thank you so much for sharing. Wow.
Yeah, we could, like I said, with that's one where you can get real specific and very narrow across different disability categories and everything. And we had a more general conversation. So these are the types of studies I think we can always revisit and find even smaller ones that might be even more targeted towards particular categories that would also be meaningful for people to hear as
Sure,
well.
sure, sure. Mm.
Yeah.
Well, hey, let's go ahead and transition. We're going to transition here from something pretty heavy to
Yeah.
my favorite part of the show. Every rose has its thorn, and today's topic, Nick, is snow. It's a little bit snowmageddon in lots of parts of the country right now when we're recording, and so it seemed like a good time and place for us to kind of delve into the world of snow. What do you think?
Oh, well, you're never going to hear me singing Let It Snow, Rick. Nick and Deglio hereby declares his overall hatred for all things snow and cold. The only thing I hate more than snow, Rick, is cold rain. But snow is up there with some of the most annoying things in the world. I could give you an hour's worth of thorns without even catching my breath. But I'll just give you my biggest thorn with snow. And that is, well, you know what? Nope, I'm going to switch on that one. I'm going to go with the snow, whether it's the cold miser or Mother Nature, depending on your take on who really controls the snow. I guess if by that, it would be the cold miser is permitted by Mother Nature to control the cold like he does officially, right? When you really want that day off from school, you never get it. Never happens. And when you don't want that day off of school because it's going to add a day to summer or take away from your spring break or whatever vacation, the snow comes. So I got a little problem with the arbitrary nature of the snow's decisions as to when I get days off or not with the snow. So that's my thorn, Rick. That's my thorn.
Gotcha.
I guess my God, if I have to do a rose, you're telling me?
Yeah, you got to do one. Yeah.
Okay.
Could be a withered rose, I guess. But sledding. Okay, good.
I like sledding down a hill. One of the most exhilarating things in the world.
Yeah.
Unless you get injured, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a story there, but probably don't need.
Probably shouldn't. Yeah.
I don't need to go there. No.
Yeah, I'm gonna go sledding, Rick.
Good one. Nick, did you guys get any snow with this latest came through?
We got some ice, but we really didn't get snow. We got a couple brief periods of snow, but that flash freezing was our main issue. But I know you guys got some snow.
Well, it's a dusting for us here in Tennessee. Although if school were in session, we'd be shut down for a week. And that sounds like a joke, but it's actually probably not really a joke. That's closer to the truth than not, actually. Okay, so I got a couple things, Nick. So let me start with my thorns. I got a couple thorns for you. Brown, dirty, slushy mess after the salt trucks and everything go. It just gets messy, especially when it sits there for us. It's just ugly, right? Slick and dangerous roads, especially when you have teenage drivers, which I've got 2 of those now. And I just get scared as a daddy about my girls out there thinking they know how to drive in the snow. And yeah. And then growing up, we had a steep rock kind of gravel driveway. And so to get out of that thing, we'd have to shovel it. Right. And of course, when you shovel it, you're shoveling rocks into the yard that you're going to have to pick out sometime. And that's awful. And then we would take the coal ashes from our coal furnace and we put them on the drive. And then that was kind of, that was a thorn, but then it was kind of a rose to kind of, go as fast as you could to try to pull out of there. It was kind of an adventure every time to try to get out of the driveway. But yeah, mixed memories there a little bit getting out of our driveway growing up. But I got some roses for you. Sled riding, that's one of mine. You already said it. Mm-hmm. Building snow forts and snowball fights, love it. And in Tennessee, since we hardly get anything, it's more like catching snowflakes and on your tongue really is about it all that we can basically ever do, except for a random once every couple years. We get a couple inches. But the big one, you've already kind of alluded to it. It's a snow day. It's a day off of school, right? It's kind of a free day. If you get one of those, they're wonderful to have. So
those are all good. Hearing your real thorn, like that example you gave is a real life one because you actually had to deal with that. Makes me realize I need to be a little more positive about snow. So I'll give you one more rose. And this is a real one. So most of our rescue dogs, as you know, we have 7 dogs. Most of them have come from actually like Tennessee. So they come from down south. They've never seen snow before. So I can say that at least like 3 of the dogs, we've been with them when they've first experienced snow. And anyone who's had a puppy, obviously, how great the feeling is of watching your dog play in the snow for the first time. So that's always a great one too. That actually, is kind of nice.
Absolutely. That's fun.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, good point. Good reminder, Nick. Hey, let's go ahead and go to the email bag. And we've got a question here from Brian from Georgia. asks or says, I heard you guys discuss your favorite coaches a while back. What about your teachers? Where's the love for your best teachers?
Is I wonder right away, is Brian a teacher?
Yeah,
He
you'd
seems he
yeah,
seems a little
would wonder. Yeah, it seems like he's invested here in
yeah,
this question. Maybe a little angry
definitely.
too. So,
Which is okay. We take all
yeah,
emotions here on the podcast.
yeah.
What do you think about this one, Rick?
I've had a lot of great teachers. Nick, as we kind of talked through the impact that teachers have, right? We did that through I think 18 of the developmental assets. So many of those could have been considered teacher filling the gap as a neighbor, a teacher filling the gap as someone important in the community, a teacher filling the gap. Right? We kind of have talked about teachers a lot, but I don't know that we've. I think Brian's right. I don't think we've talked maybe about specific teachers who have had an impact on us, and I know I've had a number of them. The one that comes to mind for me is my teacher, my professor in college, and that's Dr. Richard Hasler. What an incredible guy! What an incredible teacher and mentor, instructor he was for me for kind of the last year of my master's program, and then he kind of single-handedly got me to do a PhD. I would not have done it if it weren't for him inviting me to kind of grab a coffee with him on campus one time. So he just saw more in me than I saw in myself. I think great teachers do that. They see more in us than we see in ourselves. And he was almost always just so affirming and encouraging of me, except for once in a while, he would call me out, right? Because he had high expectations for me as well. I remember one time in particular, we were watching a video of me doing a counseling session. And I think I was just hesitant and quiet and just struggling. I think it was a struggle for me. And I think his comment to me was, "Where's the coach?" I said, "What?" He said, "Where's the coach? You're a coach." Because he knew kind of my background of coaching wrestling and football. And
Mm-hmm.
and I was taken aback by that comment. In fact, I remember going home being kind of mad about it. It's like, how dare him kind of call me out of it. But he was so right. He was just spot on. My passion, right, wasn't showing up. Uh, it wasn't showing up. And it was that hesitancy, I think, was just due to um, I didn't have confidence. Right? I didn't have confidence in what I was doing and how I was going about it. So it came, but it took a while, and he was right to call me out on it. So I don't know. I think great teachers kind of recognize when we need a boost, that affirmation, but they also recognize when we need a boost to get going, right? And so that high expectations and encouragement. I still keep in touch with Dr. Hasler. She's a great guy as well. So yeah, that's my shout out to Dr. Hasler. Appreciate you, man.
That's a great teacher example, and that's a theme, Rick. We've talked about people when we did the coaches discussion, people who push us out of our comfort zone. People who challenge us, and I think that's a theme that is important there. And for my favorite teacher example is always my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. McCreary, who just made me feel safe.
Mm.
And when you feel safe, you're willing to start taking chances and to take risks. And that is not an easy thing to do. In fact, I was watching Kindergarten Cop today with Talia, my
Mm.
seventh grader.
Classic.
And
Mm.
during the scene, oh God, right?
Yeah.
Interestingly, watching it today, definitely some of it wouldn't fly today,
I
which
wondered
is
about that. I was going
shocking.
to ask you about that. Yeah. How well that held
Yeah,
up. So, okay.
yeah, which kind of makes me a little angry, but regardless, during the scene where he's arguing with his partner because he's teaching the class, and it was supposed to be her, and he has Art Schwarzenegger has that mild breakdown where he's like, "They're walking all over me, they're pushing me around," and she gives him the pep talk, and he goes
Yeah.
in and does the police school, and teaches with the whistle and everything, and Talia's watching it, and she just says, as we're watching, she just goes, "He's such a good teacher." And I looked at her. I was like, "Well, why?" And she's like, "Look at him. Like, he's really trying to teach them. He really cares about it." And that right there, I'm like, there it is.
Yeah.
He really cares about it. Like, that's
Yeah.
that's enough. I mean, uh, he really kind of like hit the nail on the head there. And Mrs. McCreary, for me, she was that teacher for me. In fact, I can look back now and be like, she was really the one who laid the foundation for me wanting to go into education,
Wow.
even though I didn't quite
Wow.
realize that at the time. And I was fortunate enough to actually go to her retirement celebration while I was my senior in college or a first year teacher, because my mom was invited, and I went with my mom as her guest to watch Mrs. McCreary retire. And her whole retirement speech, Mrs. McCreary, her first name was Marion, she didn't mention herself once. Her
Hmm.
whole speech was about the other teachers in the school, most of whom had maybe 1/5 of the teaching experience she did. And it was like a pep talk to them, and her, she was just the most selfless, caring person. Last time I heard from her actually was in like 2013. She emailed me from the nursing home she was living in because she saw an article about some silly snow day video. Me and one of the other principals did. It's back to snow, right?
Yeah.
One of those musical call off school videos. And she was just so tickled that, one of her former students was an educator and everything. And just so nice to hear from her and such an impact she had on my life. And again, I attribute that not only was she a great teacher, because I do remember content from fourth grade. Like I can tell you stuff I
Wow.
learned in fourth grade, but most importantly was just loving going to school every day because it was just a warm, safe, supportive environment. I wanted to be there. I felt good there. Oh, does it get any better? I mean, that's what it's all about.
Yeah, Nick, we shared about the research last week, those teacher-student relationships, right? But that what goes along with them is the academic content is powerful
Yeah,
when we have those relationships, and that what a great example, right? Of you've
yeah. Look,
gotten
look
both.
at
You're
that.
still remembering
Yeah,
things. Yeah,
rigor,
yeah,
rigor and the SEL all in one piece together.
yeah.
So yeah, sorry, Bryce. Sorry we didn't do enough on teachers that first time, but hopefully between Rick's exam and Rick, I love the fact that there was someone who gave you the nudge you needed to pursue that PhD because
I
that's an undertaking. It's easier not to do it, right?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yes. Yeah. I would absolutely not be where I'm at, doing what I'm doing, loving doing what I'm doing without Dr. Hasler in my life. He has made a profound impact on my life, no doubt about it. So teachers do that. Teachers do that. Teachers have the potential to do that when they love what they do and they love their students. Man, what an amazing impact they can have on the world and in individual lives. So
Absolutely. All right. Well, sounds like you need to reach out and give a big thank you to your former teacher, Rick, and maybe we can get him as a guest on the podcast sometime.
man, that would be so great. It really would be. We got another question,
Uh,
Nick. Ready for this one?
wow. Talk about dark question. Talk about a dark
It's a
blog
little
and a dark
dark.
question.
I don't know that we should have ended the podcast with this one, but it is what it is. So maybe we
Hmm.
should have flipped these. But Alyssa from New York State asks, if you were on death row and scheduled to be executed and could pick your final meal, what would you pick?
Cool. What do you remember, Rick? The last time you were on death row, what the rules were? Can you? Does it all have to be from one place, or can you pick from different places?
I don't know that. I'm not sure. Yeah.
I think I would go. There's a restaurant in Phoenixville, in Kimberton, called Seven Stars, and they have the best surf and turf, which is obviously not something I very frequently get. But I had it one Christmas when I went out to dinner with Joe, Pat, and Tony from Angelo's, and I still remember how delicious it was to this day. So I would go
Mm.
with that specific. So I want that exact one. So prison people, make that happen. And for dessert, to wash it down, a slice of Angelo's pizza.
Oh, for dessert, pizza for dessert. Sure. Yeah.
Pizza for dessert, yeah. I mean,
Absolutely. Oh,
yeah,
that's
that would
good.
be my. That's it. That's my ultimate. There it is. That's right. No doubt. Right there.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. All right, cool. Since you did that, I'm adjusting mine just a little bit here last minute. Um,
Did you go pizza for dessert too?
no, but yeah, but I'm gonna get an appetizer. How about that?
Okay. All
I'm gonna
right.
go with an appetizer. I think I might have mentioned this before. We from Flounders in Pensacola Beach. My appetizer is going to be their fried fish. I think that the name of that fish is actually dory, which sounds awful because it's like dory from Lonely, but it's not. It's a different kind of fish, and but it's delicious. That's going to be my appetizer is the
Okay.
fried fish from Flounders in Pensacola Beach, and my main meal is going to be my mom's lasagna. because nothing beats my mom's home cooked lasagna. Yeah, perfect.
Good choice.
Final meal.
Great choice. It's shockingly, that discussion, Rick, didn't even make me hungry because, as you know, I have attempted since December. Hold on, look at the calendar. Since December 10th, I have been subsisting solely on Christmas cookies.
How's that going for you, Nick?
I hit the wall 3 days ago. Publicly announced I didn't think I could do it anymore, and I tried a couple today again, like new ones. I think I'm done. I started too early. If I had started like December 13th or 14th, maybe. But I'm burnt out. Like I feel like I need a vegetable or protein. I think I need something other than direct sugar right now.
Yeah, who'd have thought?
I know, it's crazy. Oh, one last question for you before we sign off the podcast. Very few people, I think, our generation can only relate to this. I said to Talia during Kindergarten Cop, I said, I kind of look like him, don't I? Strong like Arnold Schwarzenegger. And she literally looked at me with complete look of disbelief. Like, are you kidding? And I saw Danielle not turn her head, meaning she was staying out of it entirely. So I quickly Googled Schwarzenegger around his peak, like, peak-ish, 57-inch chest and 22-inch biceps.
Wow.
And a 30-inch waist at about 245 pounds.
Oh, my goodness. Well, that's why he was how many time Mr. Olympia, right?
Right? Like, yeah. So after I Googled those stats, I admitted defeat.
Yeah, you shouldn't take that personal. That's.
But I thought you would appreciate the
absolutely
the 80s Schwarzenegger reference there. Yeah. Well, as always, Rick, a great episode of the adventure. I hope that Rufus is proud of us and feeling like we're getting closer and closer to some good content for the brochure. And I can't wait next week to hear all about a little family trip that maybe you're going on.
Yeah. Look forward to it, Nick.
All right. Be safe. And for everyone out there, Rufus, take us home.
Very nice. I wonder how wonderful it might be if you were to visit excellentedventure.com and maybe send an email to excellentedventure@gmail.com. See what I did there? Until next time, friends, remember, love a lot, laugh a lot, and have a most excellent adventure!